Okay, my friends, the first thing before I even start uttering a single word about myself is I want you all to take your mobile phones. For those of you who are on X, go on X and follow me at the ESW_real.
Say it again.
ESW_real on X. For those of you on Instagram, that would be a little more difficult. The underline real underline ESW. That's on Instagram. And then whoever's on Spotify, I will go into this later, but Spotify, you should follow my new podcast. And that would be called The Liberty Lens. I will go into it later, I'll explain it to you, and I have some flyers to hand out. But that would be on Spotify. And I just uploaded this morning a 1 hour and 3 minute recap of CPAC, which you will probably find very interesting, and I won't have the time, of course, to do the 1 hour and 3 minutes this evening. I can only do, spotlights about what I felt and saw at CPAC. But if you want to know more, The Liberty Lens on Spotify, and listen to it. I just started this venture on January 1st, so I would be honored if you guys followed me and if you could pass the information around. Okay? With that, remember, this is going to be a tough one. So listen carefully, please. It's going to be a little like in school. It's going to be a lot of new things that you're going to learn. If you want to take notes, go ahead. Please, questions at the very end, because we don't want to lose our concentration. I have to concentrate and you're going to have to concentrate. So this is going to be a different evening tonight. I'm no Katie Hopkins. I don't do stand-up comedy. I'm more the serious diplomatic type, and
The wolf.
the wolf, exactly. And also because I'm the daughter of a diplomat, and I grew up here in the United States. That's one of the reasons why my English is fairly decent, and also why I'm more serious than Katie Hopkins is. Look her up. She's a treasure. Okay, she's a very close friend of mine. I love her dearly, and we are, I would say, polar opposites, right, Karen?
I would say that.
Yes. But she's awesome. I love her.
Isn't she from Australia?
Nope, she's from the UK.
England, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, are you all ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okie dokie, good. My water is here, I think I'm ready to. Good. So, ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow defenders of freedom, I thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight. We gather here under the banner of free speech, that precious and fragile liberty which has shaped the modern world more than any other. It is a liberty that people across continents and centuries have fought and bled for. Yet in the year 2025, we find ourselves in an era when simply stating facts or asking difficult questions can brand one as a criminal. We live in a time when honesty itself is an act of courage. My journey began in Austria, the home of Mozart and Schubert, once the seat of the Habsburgs, and a cradle of rich, artistic, and cultural traditions. Yet the same land, so proud of its intellectual lineage, placed me on trial for voicing a historical truth. How did it come to this? How did a Western European democracy, supposedly grounded in the Enlightenment, transform into a place where truth-telling can be criminalized? Tonight, I will share my story and the broader lessons it has taught me about the precarious state of free expression in the West. I will also show how this crisis affects not only Austria or the European Union, but every nation that values individual liberty, including, most urgently, the United States. As many of you know, President Trump's landslide victory was a watershed moment for people fed up with political correctness and globalist agendas. Yet it would be naive to think our fight is over. As a matter of fact, it's only just begun. Power does not relinquish itself so easily. The bureaucratic and ideological forces that punished me for quoting Islamic scripture have not vanished. They have regrouped, rebranded, and are pushing harder than ever to stifle dissent. My hope is that by the end of this hour, you will see both the seriousness of the threat and the power you hold to resist it. Allow me to start where this journey became personal. A small private seminar I conducted in 2008 and 2009. I was speaking about Islam and its influence on Western societies. It was not a large public event, nor was I trying to provoke anyone. I simply wanted to share what Islamic scripture says and how it relates to the current political and social realities in Europe. I never dreamed that citing canonical Islamic sources about the Prophet Mohammed's marriage to 6-year-old Aisha, consummated when she was nine, would lead to a criminal charge. All I did was ask a rhetorical question. What would we call such a man in the West? It was a question meant to provoke critical thinking, not hatred. Yet a journalist planted in the audience recorded me covertly and published a distorted account of what I said. Before I knew it, I was branded an enemy of tolerance, a spreader of hate, and even an Islamophobe. The Austrian authorities soon brought charges against me, alleging hate speech. A conviction followed, though not for hate speech, but for denigration of religious teachings, which is basically a blasphemy charge. I tried to defend myself by pointing out that I had said nothing untrue or defamatory. I had merely quoted historical facts recognized by Islamic texts themselves. But the courts were not interested. They insisted that criticizing me or even questioning certain religious figures was beyond the pale. One judge went so far as to claim it was impossible to characterize Mohammed as having pedophilic tendencies because he remained married to Aisha past puberty. This twisted logic, in effect, sidelined historical documentation and turned the trial into a ritual of ideological enforcement. Unwilling to concede that Austria, a land I dearly love, could betray its own intellectual traditions, I appealed. Eventually, I took my case to the European Court of Human Rights, expecting at least a thorough examination of the facts, but it was not to be. Instead, I encountered a chilling verdict. The court ruled that my speech must be balanced against the right of others not to be offended. In other words, free speech is not truly free if it might upset someone. This was not simply a defeat for me. It was a defeat for the core principle of open discourse in Europe. Although my case is personal, it is far from unique. The pattern is visible all across Europe. In Germany, the laws against so-called hate speech have expanded so much that even calling a politician a derogatory name online can invite a police raid at 6 o'clock in the morning. In France, Marine Le Pen, leader of the National Rally, has repeatedly faced legal scrutiny over speech-related charges, often timed suspiciously close to elections. In the United Kingdom, people have been arrested for silently praying outside abortion clinics or for remarks that harm no one except the easily offended. Let us not forget the United Kingdom's so-called non-crime hate incidents. Do you want me to repeat that? Just think about it. Non-crime hate incidents, where law enforcement records so-called offenses that are not even offenses, provided someone claims to have felt harassed or distressed. Those logs can appear in background checks, costing individuals jobs or reputational standing, even though no law was ever broken. A climate of self-censorship arises. The message is clear. If you speak out of turn, if you deviate from sanctioned narratives, you might still face consequences, even if you have done nothing illegal. In addition, a recent 60-minute segment offered a startling glimpse into Germany's increasingly draconian approach to policing online speech. Viewers saw pre-dawn raids targeting citizens who insulted politicians on social media, sometimes over trivial remarks like calling a cabinet minister a moron. Germany's new laws even elevate penalties for defaming or insulting political figures, spawning a kind of free market Stasi, where private organizations profit from filing speech crime charges on behalf of politicians. One 74-year-old woman, for example, faces crushing fines for implying some migrants might be freeloaders. I think she's crying. The broadcast highlights a bizarre clash between Germany's strict bans on offensive speech and Americans' broader First Amendment protections. With 60 Minutes frames partly as enlightened Europe, also emerges as a cautionary tale. An uneasy mix of moral lecturing and surreal authoritarian tactics. As raids and fines mount, the overarching lesson is that censorship, once normalized, quickly spirals into state-sanctioned, intimidation. Germany's example is a sobering reminder of how easily fundamental liberties can be undermined in the name of protecting people from offense. Friends, this is not the Europe that survived 2 world wars and emerged proclaiming universal human rights. The transformation has been very gradual, but very relentless. States now justify these measures in the name of tolerance, inclusion, and anti-discrimination. Yet they have forgotten that real tolerance is tested precisely when we allow dissenting or uncomfortable viewpoints. Lockstep uniformity of thought is not tolerance. It is authoritarian rule disguised under benevolent slogans. My friends, to understand how this censorship regime operates so effectively, we must look at the alliances between international bodies like the OSCE, which stands for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, of which the United States is a founding participating state. The European Union and even broader organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. The OSCE, established to help former Soviet states transition to democracy, now invests significant resources monitoring the speech of law-abiding Europeans. The European Union, for its part, continues to expand hate speech directives that protect specific groups or ideologies from any form of criticism. Under these rules, criticizing Christianity or Western heritage is fair game. But speaking hard truths about radical Islam, rampant crime, or immigration policies can bring legal ramifications. At the same time, the World Economic Forum, through its so-called Great Reset, openly contemplates a future where we own nothing and are happy, dissolving personal freedoms and property rights in the name of global progress. All these initiatives converge on one point: Speech that challenges these agendas is quickly labeled hateful, extremist, or conspiratorial. The result is a bureaucratic, multinational apparatus that consistently works to muzzle any viewpoint deemed incorrect. Moreover, the rapid advance of technology has become a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the internet offers unparalleled access to information. On the other, the growth of tech giants and social media platforms has created powerful gatekeepers who work closely with governments to regulate online speech. The European Union's Digital Services Act is a prime example. On paper, it aims to require companies to remove harmful content swiftly. In practice, it gives authorities a mechanism to impose their definition of harmful on billions of internet users. If that definition includes criticism of immigration policies or undermining trust in official narratives, entire accounts, pages, or even websites can be shut down with a single directive. This threat, my friends, is not abstract worry. We have witnessed repeated, high-profile cases where social media platforms deplatform scientists, commentators, and even heads of state for expressing positions that turn out later to be entirely valid or at least worthy of debate. Such swift and unaccountable censorship is precisely what the First Amendment in the United States was designed to prevent. Yet if corporations can act as proxies for the government, for government censors, those legal protections are circumvented. In other words, private companies can implement restrictions that would be blatantly unconstitutional if imposed directly by the state. We might be tempted to think this is purely a European problem, but events in Canada and the United States say otherwise. During the Canadian trucker protests, banks froze protesters' accounts at the behest of government officials, effectively punishing lawful, if inconvenient, political speech. Doctors who publicly questioned pandemic policies lost their medical licenses. In the United States, the same pandemic era gave rise to a mass wave of digital censorship, often in collusion with government agencies advising social media platforms on what constituted acceptable discourse. These episodes highlight a troubling reality. The lines between public authorities and private corporations have become blurred. Where once governments alone bore responsibility for censorship, now private banks, social media giants, and payment processors take on that role, sometimes with little or no scrutiny. Even in America, with its strong First Amendment traditions, the tools and tactics of censorship are creeping in under the guise of combating disinformation or ensuring public health. The question is not whether these tactics exist. They clearly do. The real question is how we stop them from further eroding the constitutional bedrock on which free societies stand. My friends, returning to my own story, I appeal to you to see it not merely as an anecdote, but as an emblem of the broader crisis. I was not preaching hatred. I was not advocating violence. I quoted sources recognized in Islamic theology and asked a question about them. Yet in the eyes of my own government and later the European Court of Human Rights, I had transgressed an invisible line. That line apparently was drawn at questioning or criticizing certain ideologies. This is how a constitutional right, enshrined in theory, gets chipped away in practice. We do not always see a dramatic moment like the burning of books or the shuttering of printing presses. Instead, we see laws that penalize offensive speech, social norms that stigmatize problematic ideas, and judges that redefine free speech as having to serve religious harmony or tolerance. Bring me the rainbow, please. One small step at a time, the space for open discourse shrinks until people find themselves afraid to utter anything that might cause controversy. Might I add that this is also self-censorship, but I'll get to that later. Let's turn to Europe now. Consider the European Union's approach whenever the wrong candidate or the wrong party wins an election. In Austria, my home country, the Freedom Party has often garnered a large share of the vote. Back in 1999, when the Freedom Party entered a governing coalition, the European Union imposed informal sanctions to punish Austrians for their democratic choice. More recently, the Freedom Party has again performed strongly. The elections were held on September 29th of last year. And we see the same rumblings from Brussels, threats, admonitions, talk of forming alliances to include the Freedom Party from power. They, in Brussels, claim to be defending democracy, even as they undermine the will of the Austrian electorate. After a first round of three-party talks following the elections in September, initiated by the Austrian president, they collapsed after 100 days, and the Freedom Party was asked to form a government with the People's Party, i.e. the Austrian rhinos. And they are. Those negotiations also fell through. Now, as we speak, as I speak right now, the rhinos have restarted talks with the Social Democrats, i.e. the Socialists, and a party called NEOS. NEOS is a very small party that is fiscally responsible, but socially a disaster. And they are aiming for a three-party coalition, and three-party coalitions are an anomaly in Austria, and we saw what happened in Germany because the three-party government collapsed, and Germany just had elections, which I will get to in a second. Observers believe that this new alliance could agree on economic and EU policies, but some doubt it will address key issues such as immigration and energy security. I would actually not even use the word doubt. I'm pretty certain they're not going to address anything having to do with immigration. We will just have to wait and see. But there is also the issue that people like me feel disenfranchised because the issues I voted for are not represented in the coming government. In Romania, a nationalist right-wing figure won the first round of a presidential election last year, only to have the process annulled, ostensibly due to Russian disinformation on TikTok. No evidence was ever presented. In France, Marine Le Pen faces recurring legal attacks that might bar her from running in 2027. And each time, the official rationale differs. Sometimes it's corruption allegations, sometimes foreign interference, sometimes hate speech. But the result is always the same. Keep the populist or nationalist politician out of office, even if voters supported them. Now to Germany. You all remember the elections, or did you hear about the elections that took place? Today's Tuesday, 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. Do you also remember how President Trump was extremely elated about the result?
Yep.
I'm very sorry he's wrong. He doesn't have very good advisors when it comes to German results, or parties even there. So let me tell you about what happened in Germany. Germany's latest election saw the German rhinos claim victory with 28.5%. less than they had hoped. And the once dominant Socialist Party collapsed to a historic low of 16.4%. In my personal opinion, it's still too much, but you know, we'll take the 16.4. It could be lower than that. The hard right, AfD, Alternative for Germany, buoyed by outside support and growing anti-establishment sentiment, surged to 20.8% from a previous 10%, making it the largest opposition force. Meanwhile, a revitalized left party earned 8.8%, largely at the Greens' expense, giving the far left and the far right together over 1/3 of the German Bundestag. Now let me also add here that 25% of youth voters in Germany voted hard left communist. 25%. Okay? 25%. Another 25% of the youth voters voted Alternative for Germany. See the problem? Despite the fanfare, Rhino leader Friedrich Merz is forced into another grand coalition. Grand coalition is Rhinos plus the Socialists, echoing Angela Merkel's past alliances that delivered years of drift on critical issues. They failed to address Germany's deindustrialization, shied away from meeting NATO defense targets, as you all know, and endorsed energy projects that left the country dependent on Russian gas. Today, the constitutional debt brake similarly constrains any ambition to boost defense spending or invest in infrastructure without painful social cuts. Passing reforms would require a supermajority that neither the incoming Chancellor Merz nor his socialist partners can muster, especially given opposition from the Alternative for Germany and the left party. In essence, Germany's political center is besieged by surging extremes. Unable to form stable majorities or meaningfully loosen the debt brake, the new government once again risks achieving little beyond maintaining the status quo. This gridlock, mirroring broader EU stalemates, leaves Germany facing ongoing economic challenges, a stalled military, and little leverage to fulfill the bold promises made during the campaign. And when democratic institutions systematically block the electorate's choices, it is no longer a democracy. It becomes an oligarchy, where elites circulate power among themselves under a veneer of public consent. This is the climate in which free speech suffocates. If citizens cannot choose their leaders freely, how can they openly express dissent on vital issues like migration, cultural identity, or national sovereignty? Let's now turn to President Trump. President Trump's initial election and his subsequent return sent shockwaves through the global establishment, especially in Europe. It was glorious to me, as an Austrian, to see the shuddering of those so-called elites in Europe. It's beautiful. I have no words other than that. It's just beautiful. The more they are PO'd, the better Trump is off. And Americans. While his critics label him divisive, it is undeniable that he shattered conventional wisdom and challenged the cozy relationship between multinational institutions and political elites. Suddenly, Europe could no longer count on unwavering American support. American support for every globalist venture, whether it was the Paris Climate Accords, boo, or open-ended migration policies, boo, boo.
Yes.
Trump's America First policies forced Europeans to confront their own vulnerabilities. Many European nations rely heavily on the United States for defense, though not Austria, in parentheses, and have grown used to American backing in nearly every crisis. Trump signaled that Europe needed to carry its own weight, prompting some to call him isolationist, but in truth, he was simply demanding that Europe step up and finally take responsibility.
Yes.
For the guardians of the status quo in Brussels, this was deeply unsettling, and may I add, it was beautiful for me to watch.
That's it.
While Trump's influence may embolden free speech advocates by showing that unacceptable opinions can indeed prevail at the ballot box, it also galvanizes the opposing forces. They will not bow out quietly. They will label dissent as fake news, extremism, or foreign interference. We see it happen as digital platforms intensify their content moderation, and the EU expands its legal apparatus to clamp down on disinformation. Rather than reflecting on why their policies have failed, these elites would prefer to silence critics altogether, as they did back in 2009 with me. So, what lessons can we learn from history? Europe has experienced totalitarian regimes that came to power by strangling free discourse. From the fascist states of the mid-20th century to the communist regimes in Eastern Europe, it is a recurring theme. Once speech is regulated for the greater good, it becomes all too easy for those in power to expand those regulations to every area of life. Labeling dissenters as enemies, traitors, or hate criminals is the oldest trick in the book. However, the 21st century brand of authoritarianism often comes wrapped in progressive language. Terms like inclusion, diversity, or social justice are misused to justify censoring viewpoints that do not align with a sanctioned narrative. The end result is the same. The only difference is that gulags and secret police are replaced by algorithmic blacklists, financial deplatforming, and orchestrated media campaigns that paint dissidents as morally reprehensible. One need only look at the creeping normalization of tracking hate incidents in the UK or calls in Germany for wide-ranging speech controls. Where does this end? If the principle stands that words are deemed offensive by the state, must be outlawed, then the question becomes, who decides what is offensive? Inevitably, those with power, such as the government, corporations in league with them, or activist groups favored by them, hold the reins. Everyone else is left navigating a minefield of potential speech violations. And might I add, these are the exact words I asked recently, back in late September, at the OSCE conference, Human Rights Conference in Warsaw, that I attend every single year, and I'm always the only one standing up for Western civilization. And if you want to watch those videos, you can find them on the website, and we will, the paper will be passed around the flyer where you can find that website. I always ask, who actually decides what is offensive? Of course, I never get an answer. Let me now get to the topic of self-censorship, because I don't think you guys know or understand what it feels like to have to self-censor when I'm in Europe, and how glorious it is when I come to the United States that I can speak freely, thanks to the First Amendment. An equally troubling development is how people begin censoring themselves to avoid trouble. Fear of losing a job, incurring legal fees, or being ostracized socially leads many to remain silent or to water down their views. Over time, this reluctance to speak truth morphs into an internal belief that perhaps one never held those controversial ideas in the first place. It is psychologically easier to adopt the majority stance than to live in constant tension. And again, might I add that I have lived for most of my life in this constant tension. I know what it's like. It's not good for your health, I can tell you that. And I actually bear witness to that. I'm not going to go into it now, but I can tell you that it has not been good for my health. But I'm not going to stop. Never ever will I stop. Self-censorship is the ultimate triumph of totalitarian, authoritarian methods because the state, or those acting on its behalf, no longer needs to do anything. Citizens preemptively police themselves. This phenomenon profoundly weakens the public sphere. It destroys the open exchange of ideas, which is the lifeblood of any true democracy. When countless individuals remain silent, a dangerous illusion forms that everyone supports the official stance. This is how entire societies sleepwalk into tyranny. And I am in the middle of living this nightmare in Europe right now. Mark my words. When I come back here next year, I will probably have to tell you things have deteriorated. I probably, most likely, will not have good news. Friends, consider again what happened in Canada. Peaceful truckers protesting restrictive policies found their bank accounts frozen. This was no minor bureaucratic glitch. It was a deliberate decision by authorities to financially starve people they deemed politically troublesome. Think about the implications of that power. If a government can freeze your assets without due process merely because you participated in a protest, then the rest of society takes note. They realize that opposing the government might cost them their livelihood. And that is a potent incentive for silence. Because you gotta put food on the table, right? And if you wanna put food on the table, you better stay silent. That's the message. In the United States, many took solace in the First Amendment. But we have seen those doctors lose their medical license for expressing skepticism of the official pandemic guidelines, and media outlets labeling them conspiracy theorists. Social media platforms have suspended or banned users, sometimes even high-profile elected representatives, for crossing invisible lines about topics such as election integrity, foreign policy, or medical research. The architecture of control, though less formalized than in Europe, is still growing. It is enforced by private corporations in tandem with government advisories or even casual suggestions. The effect, however, is government level censorship by proxy. Don't ever think that just because Trump was elected into office, your job is over. It's only just started. So what is the way forward? Is there a better way to address the underlying social tensions that feed the rise of so-called populism, nationalism, or dissent? Yes, and it starts with an honest and open debate. When large segments of the population are worried about immigration, crime, cultural changes, or economic stagnation, simply labeling them racist, quote unquote, or far right will not solve anything. Instead, governments could acknowledge legitimate concerns and seek viable solutions. Several European countries have integrated dissenting parties into coalitions. For instance, Sweden has begun to include anti-immigration voices in serious policy discussions rather than branding them beyond the pale. This approach channels public frustrations into tangible reforms, reducing the sense of alienation that fuels radicalization. Banning parties or harassing their leaders with never-ending legal wrangles only drives them underground, hardens their stances, and erodes trust in institutions. Likewise, we should address economic grievances directly, providing real job opportunities, reducing bureaucratic red tape for entrepreneurs, and ensuring that globalist trade deals do not undermine local industries. The key is to bring the concerns into the open rather than censor them. It is no coincidence that free speech thrives in societies with transparent governments and responsive leaders. When people see their voices matter, they have less reason to turn to extreme solutions. So I will now turn to a short report from CPAC. I recently attended CPAC, where the atmosphere, and I have a big smile on my face, was glorious and uplifting, especially during the speeches I got to watch, like Elise Stefanik, Pam Bondi, Elon Musk. I love the chainsaw. Did you see that? Did you guys see that chainsaw? And you guys, you have no clue how the Europeans freaked out. I saw that on the news in Austria, in Germany. Oh my God, Elon and the chainsaw. You can't do that. I love it.
That was too.
So we had Elon Musk. We had Argentinian President Javier Milei. He was beautiful. He was so funny. He was so self-deprecating, but he was so right in every word he said. If you have not had a chance to watch the speech, please go online and watch his speech. And of course, President Trump. 1 hour and 10 minutes of every single word being beautiful, a song in my heart, and just the energy in that room, the love, the elation, and juxtaposing that with what we're seeing in Europe. And that's what I'm getting to right now. The elation in the crowd contrasted sharply with Europe's current mood, marked by economic woes, growing censorship, and rising inflation. Notably, there was a strong European delegation at the conference, including members of the European Parliament, eager to explore a reinvigorated transatlantic partnership. Many shared the view that if Europe no longer believes in itself, evident in low birth rates and an over-reliance on immigration, why should the United States? As St. Augustine wrote, a common love creates culture, but Europe's weakening sense of identity and heritage risks undermining the very foundation of its future. And again, let me tell you, if you want to know more detail, get a more detailed report on what I saw and felt and experienced, check out the episode that I uploaded this morning on the Liberty Lens. It's a 1 hour and 3 minute episode together with my very, very close friend, Karen Siegemund of the American Freedom Alliance based in Los Angeles. So, making Europe and the West great again. The MAGA movement slogan was Make America Great Again. Europe too needs its own cultural and political renewal, one that respects freedom of speech, protects personal autonomy, and demands accountability from elites. This renewal would require restoring sovereignty to nation states. The overbearing power of Brussels, i.e. the European Union, with its top-down approach to policy, has left many Europeans feeling estranged in their own countries. That estrangement fosters resentment, which in turn fuels radicalization the EU claims it wants to prevent. Restoring free speech is paramount. We must challenge, if necessary, repeal overly broad hate speech laws that criminalize legitimate criticism. We must insist that digital censorship not be used as a workaround for laws that would never pass constitutional scrutiny. We must remain vigilant about proposal for central bank digital currencies or social credit systems. which would give governments unprecedented power over our financial and social lives. Defending freedom also means revisiting the Green Deal or other radical climate policies that impose crippling costs on businesses and families, disproportionately harming the middle and working classes. The key is not to deny environmental challenges, but to address them in ways that do not sabotage our economies or centralize too much power in the hands of unaccountable technocrats. And finally, we must hold elected officials responsible. Democracy is not self-executing. It demands constant civic engagement. When politicians promise to safeguard liberties, we must watch what they do in office, not just what they say on the campaign trail. If they break their promises, we must vote them out. If we remain passive, the bureaucratic machinery and corporate interests will continue to run roughshod over fundamental rights. Let me give you a final warning and a call to action. By now, you may be wondering how best to resist this tide. My simplest advice is the following. Refuse to be silent. The moment you self-censor, you've surrendered a piece of your freedom. Courage is infectious. When one person breaks the taboo, others follow. Support those who are silenced, even if you do not share all their views, because the principle of free speech must prevail over personal disagreements. We must likewise expose censorship, spread awareness of cases where people are deplatformed, fired, or prosecuted for speaking truths or raising valid questions. The worst atrocity in human history, Nazi Germany's extermination of millions, did not begin with gas chambers. It began with coordinated propaganda and a society too fearful or complicit to speak out. On a practical note, remain vigilant about new technologies. Learn about proposals for digital IDs, central bank digital currencies, or in social credit tracking. These might arrive wrapped in promises of efficiency and safety, but they pave the way for unprecedented control. Educate yourself, and you're doing that by sitting here tonight, and I thank you very much for that. Share that knowledge, and make sure your local representatives understand that you do not consent to such intrusions. And finally, choose leaders who genuinely commit to defending free speech and hold them accountable. Voting is not a one-off event. It is part of an ongoing democratic dialogue. If those leaders fail and falter, if they betray the promise of liberty, be ready to replace them. The responsibility ultimately rests with you, the citizens. In conclusion, in 2010 onwards, I stood in an Austrian courtroom, incredulous that I could be convicted for quoting documented historical facts. What should have been a trivial moment, voicing a reference to scripture, spiraled into a decade-long legal and moral battle. I lost not just a court case, but the comforting illusion that Western democracies naturally protect free speech. I was very naive. I realized how easily laws can be bent, how swiftly the media can turn on someone, and how tolerance can become a euphemism for totalitarian restrictions. Yet, and that shouldn't come as a surprise to you, I refuse to be silent. That is why I have taken my fight to an international stage. It is why I speak here in America, and it is why this year, on January 1st, I launched the Liberty Lens podcast. My goal is not merely to recount my ordeal, but to galvanize you into action. If it happened to me, it can happen to you. Your voice can be erased. Your freedom can be revoked. All under the cover of protecting people from offense or combating misinformation. Yes, Donald Trump's landslide victory was historic. It was a shock to the system, a declaration that ordinary people could still defy the political elites. But it is not the end of the story. The forces that targeted me and so many others are very much alive. They will always be looking for new ways to curb free speech, to brand dissent as extremism, to label legitimate questions as criminal offenses. So I stand here with a final question. Will you defend your right to speak, or will you surrender it bit by bit until it is gone? Remember, silence is never neutrality. Silence is capitulation. And freedom, my friends, in the end, belongs only to those who will fight for it. Thank you, and may liberty always prevail, and may God bless America. Thank you. So, just quickly, Anna, thank you. Anna will hand out the flyers about my podcast. Let me just quickly, if I may, just for 2 minutes.
Sure.
Do we have time?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay,
yes.
okay. And then I'll take your questions if you want.
That's what I was going to do with questions.
Yeah. So, the podcast. My podcast takes a thoughtful look at free speech and how it shapes our changing world. Why should you listen? You will hear from thinkers, activists, and everyday individuals who are shaping the conversation around free speech. You'll hear compelling stories, including my own personal story. And you will gain practical insights on navigating modern challenges like misinformation, censorship, and cancel culture, and learn how to use your voice confidently and responsibly. I have understood that many people are really busy with their lives. You need to put food on the table, you need to take care of your children, you have a household, you have a job, maybe 2, maybe 3 jobs. But I believe that defending freedom doesn't take that much. And I would like to introduce quickly to you the four currencies framework that I have launched. And I will introduce in more detail on the Liberty Lens podcast. But let me just give you a short overview. The 4 currencies are time, voice, courage, and action. And you should choose which one fits your lifestyle, your personal life best. So you can use the currency of your voice by speaking up, sharing ideas, challenging norms that are essential for promoting and protecting free speech. How can you do that? Social media advocacy, public speaking and storytelling, content creation, and amplifying marginalized voices. But I'll go into more detail on my podcast. The currency of time. Time is one of the most valuable currencies, and even small commitments can create a ripple effect in the fight for free speech. Investing your time could involve educating yourself, participating in events like this one tonight, and supporting organizations that promote free expression. You could educate yourself, you can engage in advocacy, you can host and organize events, or you can do mentoring and coaching. The third currency is the currency of your courage. Courage is a powerful yet challenging currency requiring individuals to stand firm in their principles even in the face of backlash, censorship, or fear of social consequences. So what can you do? You could stand up for free speech by defending others who are being silenced or unfairly censored. You can challenge authority. That's especially easy here in the United States. It's mostly impossible in Europe. You can share unpopular opinions on social media. You can advocate for whistleblowers and dissenters, and support individuals who expose corruption, for instance, or misconduct. And most importantly, in this currency of courage, donate to legal defense funds. I couldn't have done what I did without the help of American citizens who donated to my defense fund. I can't stress this enough. I had no job. I lost my job right after, they found out how bad I was. If I had not had the American people's generosity, I could not have taken this case to the European Court of Human Rights. And finally, the currency of your action. Action is the bridge between ideas and outcomes. Taking deliberate steps to promote and protect free speech ensures that ideals are translated into real-world impact. So what can you do? Support free speech organizations. Advocate through policy engagement, especially relevant here in the United States. Create resources. Develop practical tools such as conversation guides, fact-checking templates, anything like that. Foster change in institutions by advocating for policies that support free speech in your workplace, school, or local government. And build alliances, of course, build alliances. Partner with like-minded individuals, organizations, and communities to amplify free speech efforts. Join coalitions focused on addressing misinformation or censorship. So I will go, like I said, into much more detail about this as my Liberty Lens podcast progresses. But of course, we've had so much breaking news in the last, 6 weeks, that I have not gone into this. But I would like you to start thinking about what you can do. Are you gonna voice? Will you raise your voice? Will you spend some time? Will you exhibit courage? Or will you become active? Or, like I did, all 4 of them? Which you don't have to do. Of course, okay? I do.
We always do that.
Okay, but I will not demand all 4. But I really urge you and ask you to choose one of those: time, courage, voice, or action. And do something in your community, and especially teaching your children about the importance of free speech. And with that, I'd love for you to listen to my podcast, watch it. You don't have to look at me while, you don't have to watch it, you can just listen to it. You know what I look like, so you don't have to listen. You don't have to watch me, I'm sorry. With that, I'd like to take questions if you'd like that. Does anybody have any questions? Or are you so shocked that you're speechless? Let me just change my glasses, hang on. I'm getting old. That's why I need 2 different glasses.
You're looking better now. You're still
Right.
young.
Well, yeah, kind of. And by the way, if you guys want to get the book, if you haven't already, on the website for the Liberty Lens, there is actually a link where you can purchase the book. Please sign up on the website. You will also find you can sign up for the newsletter, and if you do that, you will automatically receive, I hope it works, if it doesn't, I'll get mad. You'll get the first chapter sent to your inbox. Huh? If you like the first chapter, get the whole book. By purchasing the book, you will support me. That's how you support me. Okay? Order 10 or more. No, I'm serious. If you want me to return, that's the way to do it. So, questions?
I'll get it when you carry it.
Do we want the microphone, or do we just speak up?
Are you a U.S. resident?
No.
Where's home base for you?
No. I live in Austria. I live in Austria. I am an Austrian citizen. I have no intention of becoming an American citizen ever. I love my country like you love yours. But I also love the United States.
Are you with, a lot of us are calling it the Trump effect. Are you sensing anything different now with the?
Where? In Europe?
In your country,
No.
so the hope is. there.
I really cannot tell you anything positive or hopeful about Europe.
Seems like they doubled down.
They're gonna double down before anything happens. I think the system is gonna have to break completely for anything to change, unfortunately.
Well, you're welcome in Texas.
I know. Believe me, when during the pandemic, my husband and I were briefly talking about leaving Austria, although that is an illusion because my husband's a doctor and he would have to retrain to be able to work here, so that's out of the question. But the only two places I would move to is Texas or Florida. Shouldn't come as a surprise. The young gentleman in the back, and then, ma'am, it's your turn. Yes.
Thank you. I am a journalist, I'll disclose,
Okay.
unlike the guy from 2009. But I was invited here by our lovely, lovely host, our lovely Pennsylvanian. I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
So, are there regulations you would recommend to protect speech either at the federal or the state level? Sometimes things discussed is like regulating the social media platforms as public utilities, or repealing the Communications Decency Act, or sometimes putting on new banking regulations to prevent political discrimination. Are there regulations you have in mind that are preferable for protecting speech?
I don't think, as an Austrian citizen, it's my place to recommend anything. I think you, the citizens, it should actually be up to you to decide what is right for you. So that's up to the lawmakers, the representatives, for you to lobby what you would like, but it's not becoming for me as an Austrian citizen to suggest anything of that sort.
And my second question was, are there U.S.-backed or American institutions that you perceive as the worst offenders from U.S. on speech? And some that would come to mind would be like government agencies, like the MDM subcommittee and DHS, or is it the corporations? Is it NGOs? I understand the multilateral institutions. What comes to mind?
Well, yeah, what comes to my mind as an Austrian speaking out at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which again, as I already mentioned, the United States is a founding participating state. Yes, the OSCE is one of the greatest offenders. Unfortunately, the CSCE back in the late 60s and 70s, you have to understand that the CSCE, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, was instrumental in bringing down communism, along with Pope John Paul, Ronald Reagan, and Gorbachev, probably, if I remember correctly. Okay. So yes, the OSCE is a terrible organization. Unfortunately, it had good intentions, but it turned into a disaster, because everything that is discussed at these meetings that I get to attend every year trickles down into the participating states, of which, like I said, the United States is a part of. However, I can tell you that back in 17 or 18, the OSCE wanted to kick me and my delegation out, and it was thanks to the U.S. ambassador that I am still allowed to speak at the OSCE, because the OSCE is consensus-based. So if one country says no, the deal is off the table. Okay? So that means we need, even if we disagree with these multilateral or international organizations, the United States should make sure to have really good free speech-minded representatives representing the American people at these events. Ma'am.
Okay, so you were talking about the German vote,
Yep.
and you mentioned 25% of the youth voted communist and 25% of the youth voted the other direction. What is that age range that you're calling youth?
I would say 16 to 30.
So 16-year-olds can vote?
Yes. Yes.
So
wow.
Yeah, even in Austria. That was done deliberately, and it actually backfired, because most of the 16 to 18, 19-year-olds, at least in Austria, are now voting right of center. It was actually done, the voting age was lowered to get the kids to vote socialist, but it's now backfired.
Yeah.
And then you in the back, sir?
Are there any countries in Europe particularly that are doing a better job with free speech?
Hungry.
Maybe Hungary.
It's the only one I can think of,
Yeah.
so we're in agreement.
But Hungary is suffering, the boot, the European Union boot.
Yes.
200 million euros are being kept from 200 million euros from the European Union that are supposed to go to Hungary are being kept from Hungary because Hungary is disobedient to European Union orders.
That is true, because they also wouldn't take George Soros.
Well, they kicked him out.
I know.
So the
Yes,
He
sir.
ain't got much friends.
Yes, thank you for coming. I've got two questions.
Yes.
First, this, what I would call excessive catering to the Muslim world in Europe, has there been any investigation of your politicians
No.
being bought off by the Muslim?
No,
So the Saudis could be paying off your politicians, nobody would know?
no, we need a Doge in Europe.
Second question I've got for you, if you don't mind.
Yes.
The whole concept of Americanism, which is embedded in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, you should have a copy if you haven't. It's so short, it's so brilliant.
It's
Have you
actually
guys-
I always carry a constitution with me.
Fantastic. Do the European youth
No.
ever study it? Yeah, I have no.
I know where you're going. No,
comprehension.
no, but
Because
let me
it's
add, I
considered
did.
propaganda.
Just
Because
like
I didn't
we're
mention that in my speech,
Yeah.
but Karen knows it, and some of you who have read my book might know it. But I grew up in Chicago, and I attended school, and in 8th grade in Chicago, and in 8th grade, in order to pass 8th grade, I had to study the U.S. Constitution and pass a really hard test. And I studied it, and I passed. I got a C. And back then, I had no clue how important this knowledge of the U.S. Constitution would one day be. Because back then, I was like, why do I, as an Austrian citizen, have to study the U.S. Constitution? I should be studying my own Constitution. Well, one of the reasons that I studied this, I can stand here before you, and I don't sound like a fool. Because I know exactly what I'm talking about. I have read it, I've studied it, I know it.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few Europeans who have. And actually, you've read my book. Some of you have read. If you have read my book, it's basically it's a love letter to the U.S. Constitution. Okay, that's who I am. I love the U.S. Constitution. Yes, sir.
Did you ever get sentenced to any type of prison time?
No, there was no prison time associated with my crime. I was sentenced to a fine, and had I not been able to pay the fine, at the end of the process, I would have gone. I could have gone to jail, but the process, which I won't go into right now, is because it's irrelevant. The process would have. There would have been steps that I was unwilling to take. I actually wanted to go to prison. But the process, in order for me to go to prison, would have actually made my family's life harder. Not the going to prison part, but the steps between the sentencing and not paying the fine, if I make sense, if I'm making sense now. There was unfortunately no option for me to go to jail without somehow making life harder for my family before going to jail.
Yeah, I just thought that you might have written your book while you were in jail. Like,
Oh, I could have done that, yeah,
Like
but it would have
Ray
been a lot shorter than it is now, because so many things have happened since. I would have written letters from jail, I can tell you that, and I would have had a lot of very important people visit me in jail. And they didn't want that, so they did that on purpose.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about your safety, because of your, government. I know that, we have people come here from China, and I've heard their speeches and them talking about that it can, like you were just talking about a hardship on your family, it causes a hardship on their family
Yeah.
back home.
Yeah.
Do you not have any concerns about your safety, when you return to your country, or of your family there?
No, no. I keep my family out of the limelight. I hardly ever talk about them. This is not their fight, really. And although they support me 100%, but there's no need for them to be involved in any way, shape, or form, so they are not. And no, I feel safe. And you know, I've gone through so many instances where I should have died many times over. And it may sound fatalistic right now, but you know, if it happens to me, it happens to me, and I've had a good life, and I think I've done more than many people have accomplished in a lifetime. So I'm a little bit like, maybe not as extreme as Katie, but she feels the same way. If it happens to me tonight, then I will leave this earth knowing that I've done everything I could, and I can actually look myself in the mirror and say, you did everything you could.
Pretty much fear, faith over fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have never been afraid in my life. Never. Because fear actually stops you from being active. It just, you know, that's not the way to do it. I'm not afraid. I'm concerned, yes, but I'm not afraid.
You're talking about, could I ask you one
Just
more question?
follow-up question, yeah.
Okay, talking about the censorship,
Yes.
and we are censored, we're still censored greatly because of what is not reported.
Yes.
And,
That is up to you to change it.
but how many of you in this room are aware that this week that 70 Christians
Yes.
were beheaded in the Congo?
Yes, correct. By
Yes,
Muslims.
yes,
By
yes.
devout, Quran-abiding Muslims.
How many were aware of that? I'm telling you, it's
And
not
that is
been
exactly,
reported.
if you follow
If you
my
watch
ex
Newsmax,
account,
you saw it on Newsmax.
yeah, but also if you follow my ex account, you would know it. Okay, it's there.
Censorship's there.
Congo.
Yeah.
I think, ma'am, you and then you again.
And then that,
And then we're gonna stop. And if you have any private questions, I can take a few of those. But I need to sit down because my foot is starting to hurt.
I'll massage it for
I'm just curious, in the course of your trial, and you had all those people attending at your, lecture where the person twisted everything. Did all of that come out? I mean, did anybody vouch for you that you did not say what he claimed you said?
Well, it became very clear because it was all on tape. But the judge twisted the words. She actually twisted my intention. Again, she accused me, back then it wasn't considered a thought crime just yet because we weren't that far yet. But it was actually a thought crime that she accused me of. I was very clear in what I said. I said, I'm going to quote myself. Mohammed married Aisha when she was 6 and consummated the marriage when she was 9. What do we call this if not pedophilia? And the question was not, Mohammed was a pedophile, because I know that's against the law in Austria. I said, if we cannot call it pedophilia, what do we call it? I was searching for another word. And the judge twisted it to make it sound like she's calling Mohammed a pedophile, which of course I knew she was going to get me on that.
So it was implication.
Yeah. I never said Mohammed was a pedophile, and I will not say it. So if this is on YouTube, I will not say it.
How do you feel about Trump pulling out of NATO?
I don't really want to get into NATO because that's not really my playing field. I don't know enough about it. And also, as an Austrian citizen, you know, Austria is not part of NATO. so I don't really have that much of an opinion.
I didn't know
What
that.
I will-
Austria's not a member of NATO?
No, we are a neutral country.
Oh, good.
Right.
I'm glad
We're
to
not
hear
part
that.
of NATO. But what I can tell you is I believe that NATO is a relic of the Cold War, and it's now no longer serving its purpose. And finally, Turkey should never be a part of NATO. That's all I will say on that.
Wasn't NATO originally called the League of Nations? Is
No.
that-
No,
okay.
that was the
Okay,
UN.
I was-
That was
okay,
just
gotcha.
Yes, sir.
I just, in terms of expectation, I'm gonna listen to your podcast, and support you, but, just in
They
general.
want us out.
Yeah.
That was a clear sign. Yes.
My
Final question.
My question was, if you're still, if you're doing this podcast from Austria?
Yes.
So.
I will self-censor, yes.
Okay, so that's what I was gonna get at, are we gonna be able to get
But-
under the
but
layers of what you do?
I will have my friend Karen from LA, and you will be able to see, she doesn't have to censor, I will. So that makes my podcast different from all the others. So please subscribe, I hope to see you soon. And yes, final, regarding the Lincoln dinner, the Lincoln-Reagan dinner, if you need me as a guest speaker next year, please let me know. Or any other organization.
That's great. Let's give her a big round of applause and thank her for coming.
Thank you.
And we have recorded this. I have recorded it, and so it will be on YouTube on our channel. Yes. I know.
If it does,